Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Good morning, everybody, and you're very welcome to our Signpost Series webinars. My name is Andy Boland, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so as we look at another environmental issue that hopefully will be of interest to you. I'd like to give a mention to our partners who have been on this journey now since back in March of 2020, Dairy Sustainability Ireland, Food Drink Ireland SkillNet, and the National Rural Network. Thank them for their support and help in putting this series together. This morning, we're beginning a two series, really, a double act from our colleagues in Ballyhaise Agricultural College. I'm delighted to be joined by John Kelly, the principal of the college this morning. And I'd like to thank John because they have a busy couple of weeks coming up with the lead up to their open day on the 13th of July. And John is going to talk to us this morning about really how the college have gone about reducing their environmental impact in a number of ways. And next week, Donald Patton, the researcher at Base of Ballyhaise, he's going to focus more on reducing end surpluses and looking at grassland issues. But this morning, John is going to give us maybe a general overrun, looking specifically at water quality and a few other things like that. So John, thanks very much for joining us, and you're very welcome.
Thanks, Sandy.
John, before you begin your presentation, I'd just like to give a mention to our Q&A section at the bottom of your screens there. So if our viewers if they want to make any comments or questions, to put them into that box. And I'm joined by my colleague, Padraig Foley. And Padraig, thank you for taking the time to give us a handout this morning. And Padraig is going to keep an eye on the Q&A session, and we'll hopefully have time for a good discussion at the end. So John, maybe before you begin your presentation, you might give us a bit of a background to yourself and how you finished up in Ballyhaise and the work indeed that you're doing at Ballyhaise before you begin your presentation.
Okay, thanks, Andy. So I'm originally from a dairy farm in East Donegal in a place called Killigordon. There's also a creamery there. So if you look at some of the milk cartons that are around the country, you'll see my address at the bottom of those milk curtains. So it's a well-known part of Donegal. It's quite an intensive farming region, or historically intensive, but it's a beautiful place as well, with the River Finn flowing through it. So I have a passion for agriculture from when I was my earliest memories, being involved in the farm at home. Machinery is my background. That's tractors. Like a lot of our students that come to Ballyhaise, was the graw for me. And I studied agricultural engineering in Newcastle University after finishing my secondary school education in Stranraer. Again, a thing that I have in common with a lot of our students, Andy, is that I didn't really know what I wanted to do after I finished college. And I went back to Donegal and worked in construction with McMenamin Steel Construction in Killigordon for 3 years, and got to know the Northwest really well on that job, on the road 2 days a week, selling sheds. And meeting farmers, and that was something that was really enjoyable, and getting to know every inch of Donegal was another experience, to see the diversity of that county, from the east to the west to the north to the south, and all the different type of landscapes that you have was fascinating. I joined Teagasc then in 2001. It was my sister-in-law seen the advertisement in the Sunday Independent for a teacher in Kildalton. And believe it or not, I never heard of Kildalton. Coming from Donegal, it was a place I hadn't been, a county that I hadn't been to before, in Kilkenny. So I applied for the job, done my interview in Dublin, and was lucky enough to get that job, teaching machinery in Kildalton. And I was in Kildalton then for 11 years, the last 2 years of which I was the assistant principal. And then I was fortunate enough to get a promotion to be principal in Clonakilty Agricultural College. So I went from Kilkenny, packed up our family, and moved down to West Cork, the far side of Cork City. For anybody that doesn't know Clonakilty, it's a long way from Kilkenny, never mind Donegal. I was there then for 1.5 years, not that long, and then Felix McCabe, who subsequently passed away, he retired out of Ballyhaise, and I took up the position, and I transferred from Cork to County Cavan, and I've been here now since for 8 years, principal in the college. I'm delighted and honoured to be the principal here because it's an amazing place. I've seen the 3 Teagasc Agricultural Colleges now, and I've worked in all 3. But I suppose from a college perspective, the farm here is really special. We have a very substantial farm of 500 acres. It's drumlin country. The geography and the terrain is beautiful. We've spectacular amount of biodiversity, as you'll see in my presentation. And we also then have agriculture and forestry intertwined with that biodiversity. It is an amazing place to work, and with myself, with my teachers, colleagues, farm staff, domestic staff, are involved in teaching many hundreds of students every year. So, and again, that's a great opportunity to be able to sell and explain what we'll be talking about today to those students. So the college has a fascinating history. I've just mentioned that in my introduction, that it's quite a substantial landholding. It opened in 1906. So I know Kildalton recently celebrated its 50th anniversary, but this college is approaching its 120th anniversary. So we're involved in agricultural education in this region for a long time. The estate dates back to the Ulster plantation, which again is back to the early 1600s. The current house that is a landmark for the college and well known, it's in most of the pictures and publications that we have for the college, was built in the early 1700s by the Newburghs, and it was designed by Richard Castle. And Richard Castle was a very famous German architect based in Ireland and designed many of the Irish country houses of that period, including Leinster House or Westport House would be famous examples of that. What is interesting is that the college closed for 3 years around 1916 due to cutbacks, which resulted from World War I, the Great War. So again, the college has seen a lot of turbulent times. If you think like 2 wars, for example, it would have seen the pandemic, the Spanish flu, and these things have a habit of repeating themselves, unfortunately. And it's, I suppose, one thing that's important to remember is that our food production, our farmers, our students continue coming here through all the uncertain times. And I think the history of the college is testament to that. The college staff is the principal, myself, Marianne Lyons, assistant principal. We have 24 teachers. We have 4 administration staff, 9 farm staff, and a domestic staff, farm staff. Our kitchen, our cleaning would be contracted out to private companies. I just quickly show you this slide because one of the things I think is important when you talk about Ballyhaise is the reach of the college to the region. So there's only 1 college in this half of the country, and I have a list of the farms that come from this region that the college touches, and it's approximately 30% of the farmers in the country. This would be their agricultural college. I suppose what's different from the other colleges down the country is that our farmers are predominantly part-time, so they're not all full-time farmers. A lot of them will have part-time jobs. So I think that's something that people mightn't realize is how important the college is to the region. Also I split the sheep farmers and dairy farmers from that, and 8% of our catchment here would be dairy farms. 27% would be sheep farms. So just see the importance of sheep production to our students that come to the college. Obviously, the rest will be all predominantly beef and cattle. Then over on the right-hand side, you'll see the typically where our students come from. So Cavan would be the most important county. I've circled that on the right-hand side of that table. Then Monaghan, Donegal, Meath would be the other big counties. And that's, again, an idea of where the students actually come from. Donegal is a very important county, and it's quite a long way away, but students still have to come here and study their full-time education. Of the first year class, around a quarter of them will be dairy farming, but around a third of them will be sheep farming. So the farm then is 146 hectares. It's 57 hectares of forestry. We have 35 suckler cows, 200 ewes, and 120 dairy cows that are on a research farm, which Donald Patton will be talking about in more detail next week. The farm itself, I mentioned in my introduction, is drumlin country, and this is an aerial photograph of the farm. And if you look closely, sometimes it's hard to get perspective on the hills, but you can see the drumlins are generally pointing in the same direction. There's north to the south, and you can see the shaded areas to the side of them. There's some fantastic features that you have in drumlin country. So we have a river running through the farm, quite a substantial river called the Annalee, that flows into the Erne and ultimately leaves the island at Ballyshannon. We have Esker Lakes. Well, this is a swamp, quite a substantial area that's not farmed. It's completely given over to wildlife. But then around that, you have very productive drumlins. We have, on our left-hand side, we have a very substantial wood that would have been part of the college that's now owned by Quilcha, and that's a mixture of oak and Sitka spruce. Interlaced through our college, then we have substantial areas of forestry throughout the college, which again you can see quite clearly on this aerial photograph. We have a large part of our farm, around 20% is floodland. So a couple of times a year, the Annalee will burst its banks, and large flat areas, we call them meadows, will flood. And that's particularly challenging when you want to get productive grass into those areas, because ryegrass, if it's underwater for 3 days, generally doesn't survive. So that's a particular challenge that we would have. And obviously anybody that lives beside a river will be familiar with that. I suppose one of the things that's different from the River Finn, where I grew up, is just below where our farm is, the river's tidal. So it empties, so it might flood, but within 24 hours, generally after it stops raining, the flood will have disappeared. But we're a much longer way away from where the river exits in Ballyshannon. So the river's very slow. It could take up to 5 days for our floods to subside off our land when we have particularly high floods. We have the college buildings in the centre, and we have the farm yard quite a bit away from the main campus buildings. Just a slide here on climate action. Back in 2019, RT had a young youth citizen assembly on climate action. And these are just articles that I took off the internet. Our local representatives, there's a tweet here from St. Patrick's College and another article in the Anglo-Celt. And these young people represented Cavan, but they also had a group set up within Cavan with many more individuals on it. And they asked me to come in and talk to them. They're young teenagers, typically 13, 15, 16, that sort of age group. And I met them, and I was absolutely gobsmacked about their enthusiasm, but also then their anxiety about where we were heading with our climate. And I think for me, if we are going one direction in our farming systems and through signposts that we have to change the direction slightly, then like the college history shows, we have blips or little chicanes that we have to take. There's little roadblocks on the way. So like World War I, for example, like the Spanish flu, now like the pandemic that we had in recent years, and now with the conflict that's going on in Ukraine. But we still have to change direction. We just have to go around those little roadblocks. And climate has to be our ultimate goal, that we have to be able to have sustainable systems that meet our commitments that we've given to Europe to try and fix what the changes that we've done over the last 150 years. I think that's really important, and to young people in particular, and to see the passion that they have and the anxiety that they carry, that I felt it really strongly when I met these people, and it's definitely given me something to focus on to be able to do our bit. So I think that's important, just from my perspective, the influence that these young people have had on me. The ASSA program is something that we took on before Signpost, and the ASSA program has an advisor based in Ballyhaise, Donald Kennedy. And Donald has given us lots of ideas and lots of things to work on the farm, which I'm going to go through shortly in a slideshow. Then we also have the work with the local law pro. We've worked with them at the start. And our farm, part of our farm is actually part of one of the PAs, the priority action areas, the Annalee in Butler's Bridge. because that is an area of water that they wanted to see could they improve. Now, it's not just linked to farming, it's also the catchment for Cavan Town as well. So the council had a lot of work to do as well. So it's been very interesting to look at that. So I'm just going to change. I just have to stop sharing this and share my slideshow, which will only take a second. So rather than having loads of slides, I put up some pictures. So this is a picture from our highest point in our farm, and you can see down over the green drumland that we have, and as I said, interlaced by forested areas. I just took this picture on my way to work yesterday morning, and again, it's a drumland just outside where I live and outside Cavan Town. And again, it's that particular farm's farmed very intensively, but maybe what you can't see in this picture is the steepness of the hill. Like, it's much too steep for machinery to try to navigate. And likewise, the cattle struggle to walk on it too. So there's loads of little terraces. If you walked over that, there's little areas that the cattle walk from side to side on. But I suppose if you go back to this picture, what we've done with those areas over many years, we have a forestry section here and a forestry advisor, Kevin O'Connell, and over time we've planted the most inaccessible parts of drumlands with forestry. We have the river. Again, I took these pictures last night. This is the Lee that flows through the centre of the farm, so you can see how important what we do here is to water quality. Without question, the thing that I feel is the most important is that we've put in, we've fixed up our slurry storage. That's a slurry tank that we replaced with like. It was 45 years old, but we couldn't use it because it had rusted so badly. If you went above the second ring, it was starting to leak. So we've had to replace that. We've replaced our outbound turn pad and lagoon with a conventional cubicle house with underground slurry storage. And what that has done is, although we had enough storage before, now we have more storage where we don't be in a panic to go and spread in February when we're allowed to spread. So if the weather's not suitable conditions in February, that we have that extra capacity of 3 weeks where we're not in a panic to go and spread. That's made a huge difference. So when we go spreading now, we can wait until the ground conditions are appropriate. And again, if I just go back quickly to this picture, if you spread slurry on a very steep hill like that, and you subsequently have poor ground conditions and very heavy rain, then you're going to have difficulties with runoff from that land. And you can see in that picture, the drumland runs straight into the river. So you have to have that slurry capacity and have that little bit of flexibility in February, that you're not in a panic to go and spread. We've started upgrading our silage pits. The silage pits were put in the 50s and 60s, and again, we had issues with floors starting to give up, and the repairs every year just weren't meeting the requirements of the heavy machinery. We just put this in before Christmas. We haven't used it yet. So dung storage is something else that we also have to try and cover. So we just put in the shed to be able to tip our farmyard manure into, that it's the runoff's not coming off. We've also make a lot of bales here. We would make more bales than a farm would make because of the research. So we're taking out grass more often for the different plots that we have, and we make almost 1,000 bales every year. And we put in a concrete pad to keep these bales. And you can see, like, when you make bales, like, there is going to be runoff off bales, and now that's captured very effectively in the channels that we have. We also have different outlets, so when there's no bales on it, that we can let the water off the clean pad directly into our stormwater system. This is as dairy farmers will know, the last 50 meters of farm roadways into the milking parlour can be a challenge, and we've made the area smaller with the barriers, and then what we've done when we put in the new slurry storage is that we made sure that this area that we've fenced off with these barriers is caught and put into the slurry tank, and you can see that work. The roadways is ongoing work, and we've a lot to do on roadways. We've a little bit done, but we've a lot to do. So to continuously let the water off the roadway and not to let it run. So you mightn't see it in that picture, but there's quite a significant angle on the road to take the water to one side. Covered our collecting yard, our handling units. We have a lot of handling units for training students, and wherever possible to try and cover those. Again, we've work to do to doing that as well. The riparian zones along our rivers and water courses, we've worked on and fence those off. The sewage system, we had a lot of septic tanks in the college. It's quite a large area. We've a good few dwelling houses. We had to put in a sewage system and pump station to try and get rid of the septic tanks for these buildings. And again, that's only happened in recent years. As I said, we have a lot to do. This is a roadway it's a relatively new roadway up through a drumlin, but there's not enough of an angle to one side, so the water starts to run and it destroys the road and can take water straight into some of the water courses and the silt that comes with it. The bridge, we haven't fixed that yet. That's a very busy, it's our own bridge. We have to try and capture the water on that bridge and not let it directly into the river where animals cross. So that's something we have to work on. We don't have enough storage. We're putting in more storage this year for bales. So some of the bales are still on yards like we used to do. So again, we have more work to do to get proper systems for storing our bales. So I'll just go back to the presentation now. So that's the ASSA program. So next I want to just go back into the slide. Let's just take me a second. The biodiversity then, I mentioned that in my introduction as well. So this is a breakdown of our farm. So 153 hectares of grass, conifer, broadleaf, mixed agroforestry, scrub, lakes and ponds, wild meadowgrass, unfarmed, watercourses and open drains, escaped hedgerow. So we have 18.5 kilometres of hedgerow, 10 kilometres of watercourses, which is phenomenal. We have lakes and ponds, nearly 7 hectares, and the scrub area, 2.28 hectares. So again, that would have been evident if you looked at the aerial photograph at the start of the presentation. How do we know these things? Well, one of our teachers, Linda Coughlin, has mapping experience. She works in forestry and has mapped all the features out, and we've those identified and categorized. And again, let's go back to presentation, just to our slideshow, just to show. So again, that's our river. It's our dairy on the left-hand side, the river on the right, and the riparian zone that I talked about earlier from a water quality perspective, but then also from a biodiversity perspective. If you look closely, you can see trees planted there, and we've made these areas bigger. And again, we haven't done it all, but we've started hedge planting. So that's in our beef unit. There's not much hedge to see yet, but it's been trimmed back in line with best practice. It's to try and get it to thicken out at the base. Again, this is something that we're going to do over successive years now, is plant a hedgerow along this road, but do a little bit each year for training with staff and advisors and teachers, but then also to be able to use it with our students. We've done this a long time ago. It's almost 20 years ago, where we've taken corners of fields out and planted trees just in maybe about 8 meters by, even less, maybe about 6 meters by 6 meters, to take that triangle out of the corner of the field. And that's done in numerous places around the college. We have agroforestry, which I showed you at the table at the start. We have, along with EPA and Med-Éireann, there's a paleontology garden. A number of these are around the country to look at climate change and over many years to see if climate changes have an effect on how plants are blossoming and growing. We have cabin beekeepers that have been based here for a long number of years. So again, we would have an awareness of the importance of the biodiversity in the college. I suppose I just took this a couple of weeks ago. It's the wall beside the way into the canteen. If you look very closely, there's I don't know if it's a great tit or a yellow tit. There's an awful lot of bird life in the college. Everything from small garden birds to birds of prey. The biodiversity that they have, the habitat that they have is extensive. We have a large number of bats in our own buildings and barn owls in our own buildings. So that's the biodiversity. I just go back to the presentation now. The last part then is the Signpost program. So the college is a Signpost farm. So one of the things that we've done from the start is we appointed one of our teachers to coordinate that. So Mary Midland is coordinating the Signpost program across the different enterprises that we have here. The early work that she done was to allocate responsibilities for the people best placed to carry out the actions under the 4 categories: farm catchment, water quality, gaseous emissions, and biodiversity. We have to look then at our college accounts, and again, the college accounts are a little bit more complicated than farm accounts to separate out what's specifically related to the farm. That's currently being done in the college to get objective analysis of where we are with regard to our emissions. Obviously, we have the board BIA across our enterprises, so that's available. We've completed an initial sustainability planner and agreed actions that we have. Like I was showing you, we've lots done, but obviously we've lots to do, and we've agreed that in the planner document. I suppose more than anything is to use the college as a resource for communicating the various solutions that need to be implemented to our students and farmers. And as I said, we've been here for almost 120 years, so we have a bit of experience in doing that. So we do have environmental farming, particularly on our level 6 program, and that's something that Mary looks after with our level 6 students. And to be able to use our resources and experience here, and then also the targets that we have in our sustainability planner is important. Our college pastor development is a cornerstone of what we're going to be doing, but again, Donald's going to talk about that next week, so I leave that to him. So again, just a few other slides just to show before I finish up. There's only a couple more minutes, Andy. So I suppose in no particular order. So all our fertilizer it's all protected urea at this stage. But also in that picture, our fertilizer spreader, we've upgraded that numerous times over recent years. So to the point now where the latest fertilizer spreader is completely controlled by the GPS. So when the operator drives around the field, the fertilizer spreader picks that up, and then it'll take over after that with regards to the application. So if the driver drives slightly too narrow, then the fertilizer spreader will narrow its spreading pattern. The driver drives slightly too fast, then it'll increase the output, and vice versa. But then also the gear oaks, which we call them in Kilkenny, but the short ground or the triangles that are left, again, fertilizer spreader will accurately apply the fertilizer in those areas. That's again our John Deere. You can actually see the GPS receiver at the top of that tractor. One of the questions I had was how would it work in drumlins, and although it's not quite as quick at picking up the signal as it would be in flatland, it's worked very effectively for us. Again, the sprayer, we've upgraded our sprayer as well. We do have tillage in the college now. That's something that we've taken up recently. We have upgraded our heat recovery in our dairy to make sure that the hot water, we can take as much of the hot water from the milk, or the heat from the milk to heat our water that's used in the milking parlour. And we switched to gas for heating our water from electricity. We've upgraded our cooling system for our milk. We've swapped to electric car. Approximately once we get up and running with this car, it'll do around 20,000 kilometers a year. That's more than half the carbon emissions that would be out of a diesel car. And again, I'll use that personally a lot myself to go to any of the meetings that we have around Teagasc. So, and that's been quite interesting because I can make Oak Park no problem. So that's within the 250 kilometer range. I've also been to Moor Park to meetings there and had to stop in Rathdowney on the way down for half an hour, which I'd normally stop for 15-20 minutes on a journey like that anyway. So it's actually something that surprised me how easy it is to get around in electric cars. Now the only thing I can see is the electric charging points. They need more. As car numbers increase, then we need more charging points. We've changed our heating system to biomass, so we heat by wood pellets. I would make a point here. I think heat pumps are the way forward. There's a lot of maintenance on biomass. But if I was building a house, I wouldn't like to be told that I can't put a chimney into it. I'd be happy to heat it and insulate it with a heat pump, but I'd still like to have the option of lighting a fire should the electricity go out. It's just one of those things, and we've done the same here. So you can see oil boilers on the left. This spring, there were shortages in the Midlands for heating oil, and we had to wait about 10 days for heating oil, and we heated the place with the biomass. And then about a month later, we had to wait 3 weeks for wood pellets. They couldn't be got. And then I was able to heat the college with the oil. And I think there's a lesson in that for everyone. We haven't done anything in solar yet, but I suppose just to explain that we had an awful lot of work to do in our wiring in the college. Much of it dated back to the 60s. We've spent a long number of years upgrading the wiring in the college, and there's no point going at the solar until such time as we have the wiring upgraded, and we're nearly there. So that's the slide show. So that's really it. Andy, as I say, bang on time.
Thanks very much, John. That was a very comprehensive. The photos really, John, to me bring home, and there's one or two things that struck me initially, is especially with the initial batch of photographs relating to water quality and what you had to do, the amount of concrete and steel and the cost of that, and the cost of that isn't going to get any cheaper on farms, and probably the amount of it that has been put in and possibly has to be put in is significant going forward. I mean, I'm not going to ask you how much all that cost, but I mean, there was a lot of tack there from even the machinery side with low emissions, the fertilizer spreading. I mean, really, that has to be acknowledged for what has been put in, and what has got. I know there's grant assistance available, but I mean,
I think, Andy, for any farmer, how intensive, how large, whether it's part-time, full-time, I really think having a plan and knowing what you want to achieve is very important, and to work towards that, no matter how little or how much you can do now, if everything has an end game that you're working towards that, I think that's really important. And I think then the needs, what's the greatest risk, is where you need to start. And for me, the bales were the big one for us, and that's where we started with. The bales were being put in hardcore, obviously away from water courses or drains, but you can see what comes out of them. I think that was the biggest risk that we had. Then kind of simultaneously to that, being able to have that extra 3 weeks in February, I think that was really important. Now, the overground tank is what gets us that little bit of extra capacity. And again, we were lucky when we done it. We done it before any of the inflation that we have at the minute, and it was on an existing site, so it was reasonably good value for what we done.
And just on that, John, I assume that you find, especially with the low emission slurry spreading and the overground tank and maybe a more dilute type of slurry going out, that it's easier spread, and perhaps even you're getting better, nutrient use efficiency out of that slurry. I presume you found that as well.
So a couple of things that we started this year doing our slurry analysis, so each tank, we're going to try and do that over a number of years, and to build up a picture. Once we know what a tank gives us, because obviously the same animals are on top of the tank, we'll know what the nutrient value of that slurry is. That's been interesting, but what we found, it's just reinforced the need to put the slurry out in our silage ground for K in particular, that we shouldn't really need any chemical K if we keep putting the slurry on the silage ground. I showed you the picture there of collecting the water off that part of the farm roadway that goes into the milking parlour. That's really watered down our slurry. Was the rain, we had 14 mil of rain here earlier in the week, and I was standing out making a film with Declan for promoting our open day, and all you could hear was the water gushing into the tank from that little bit of a roadway. But you're right, that's watering down our slurry, and it's making it very, very straightforward to agitate and apply with the low emission slurry spread. And with any of that we gathered during the year is going on to our dairy ground, and again, the response is pretty strong. People will see for themselves when they come to our open day And you can't really illustrate that in a picture, Andy, but it's been quite impressive.
Yeah, and one other thing that I picked and was commented as well in the questions that you know, when you look at your biodiversity pictures, you know, you could say there's a lot less cost, there's a lot of effort to do what you do, but really that's a really double win, which, you know, is not as expensive as your first set of pictures, and it's probably something that we should be, you know, and maybe something that we've left behind a lot in a lot of the schemes. I mean, we're going back to the Control of Farmyard Pollution Scheme and the Farm Improvement Program back in the 80s, 90s, you know. We've had a lot of infrastructure-based grants based around yards and that, but, you know, a lot of simple things that you've done out around the farm for biodiversity can make a huge difference, especially in an intensive farmed area.
Yeah, with our students, that's something we've discussed here, that the students shouldn't, you know, students that are part-time farmers, that's something they can get involved in with likes of hedgerow planting and hedgerow maintenance. And it's relatively easy to teach somebody that and give them the skills. But like, we're learning ourselves as well, Andy. It's, you know, like, a lot of us wouldn't understand, like, if you plant a hedge and you clip it back to nothing after a couple of years, like, that's hard for me to understand. But that's something you have to do to get the hedge to thicken up at the base. That's just one example. Or how you stop the weeds growing in that hedge. Again, that's something we wouldn't have experience of, and we're learning ourselves. But you're right, like, it's a skill that's easily to learn, and it's easy to implement. And then the cost, as you rightly point out, it's nothing compared to laying concrete or putting steel up.
But can have a dramatic impact, you know, from an environmental.
We are spoiled here, Andy. Like, you can see from the pictures, like, this farm was set out in the 1600s, and as a landscape feature as part of these big houses. So we're starting from a very high level. But again, it's the long game, I suppose, Andy, and what you're planting now, or what fences you're putting up, will have a huge impact on the biodiversity. I suppose there's things like the barley yellow dwarf virus. We didn't spray an insecticide in our barley this spring, and there's, you know, there's decisions that I think that's been a good decision. Like, the disease on the crops is small, but I'm sure the impact of not being able to put out that insecticide from a biodiversity perspective is going to be worth it.
Is this your first spring to do that, John? Is it?
Yeah, well, the farm, as the land was, there was originally a research site here owned by the Department of Agriculture, that's similar to what they have in Oak Park or in Kildalton. So this farm had a lot of tillage, believe it or not, for forever, right up until the 90s. So we just went back to those tillage fields, even though for 20 years they've been in grass, and put our barley into those. So you were starting from fields that have been tilled for years before that. So yes, it's new to us, but it's not new to the farm. Padraig.
And John, have you any plans maybe to grow some protein crops on the farm, or, you know, or is there, you know, is there a constraint there with soil, with
No, there's not. There's not. The difficulty we have is the shoulders of the year. So even though our rainfall is around 1 meter a year, which is relatively low compared to when you go west of here, even to West Cavan, it's relatively low. It is our clay soils at the shoulders of the year are slow to dry. They're a little bit trickier to till. So your windows then are very short for planting crops. And I think at the end, it's going to be the same getting the crop out. But actually growing the crop, whether it's protein or whether it's a cereal crop, there's no problem growing them, none at all. So we've no plans. We're going to obviously plant a catch crop. I tend to keep those fields in tillage next year. We have a lot of students from Louth and East Meath, North Dublin that are from tillage farms. So you could argue that we should have been doing it the whole time. So we'll keep them in tillage. I'm not sure what we'll do for the catch crop yet, Andy, because we have to do that anyway to be compliant. But if we can get value out of it for our animals as well, that's something we still haven't made up our mind on.
Padraig, there's loads of questions there coming in. You might.
That's a question. And we've a couple of
them together. And
yeah, we'll go through as many as we can. If you put them into the Q&A, we'll keep tabs on what's asked already. Just you mentioned yourself and Andy had a bit of a discussion around the biodiversity and planting the corner of fields and so on. Did that have any impact on your single farm payment from a UAA perspective? You know, from a conventional farmer's perspective, if they planted a corner of a field, the department will be out and they'll resize the field and they'll lose some of their ground.
Yeah, that's done. Those corners were planted around 20 years ago. Now, I don't know the answer to that question. It obviously didn't have an effect here, but it's tiny. I think that's important. Like, if you added up what's there, it wouldn't be much more than the verge of the field. Certainly, if it was a tillage field, that'd be lost anyway. Yeah, I think that's really important to say. Like, here, even the boundaries that tillage farmers have to have in place, it's certainly no bigger than that. It's the natural arc of a machine anyway, driving around. So, whether it would have an effect, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Lots of comments here on great presentation, great work for biodiversity. Andy touched on the protein end of things. On the grassland side, have you looked at multi-species?
Yeah. We have done a very, very small bit of that. And to be honest, we found it challenging with weeds, but that's, as I said already, it's a learning experience for us and our staff on the ground, and certainly something we're going to keep trying. Now, Donald will talk at length about our clover next week, and obviously that's a mixed species too. So that's been doing quite well, but I don't want to steal his thunder. I'll let him talk about it next week, and he'll explain about what's went well, what hasn't went well with that.
You're not going to give a sneak preview, no?
No.
Your heat recovery in the milking parlour, do you reckon that'll pay for itself, or is it something that Teagasc could afford to do, but that maybe a conventional farmer couldn't justify, or do you
No, that was a modest investment. It certainly will pay for itself. That's relative. That unit's just plumbed in a couple of hours. Where I'm not so sure, where I got beat was the variable speed vacuum pump. I just even though we're Teagasc, I couldn't justify the cost that it was going to cost us for the electricity saving. Now, obviously, if you're putting in a new milking parlour, it's completely different, but I couldn't justify it.
Well, from an electricity point of view, then again, we'll go back. Given that you have 10 kilometres of river going through the farm, have you considered looking at hydro? You mentioned that you will look at solar when you get your wiring done.
Yeah, I was actually contemplating mentioning that in the presentation. No is a very simple answer for the hydro, because it's a very slow river with very, very flat, so there's no head which you need for hydro at all. Now, we're also in an SEC, Special Area of Conservation, Lochouter SEC, which is a spectacular water-based SEC, and which is the picture behind me. That's absolutely beautiful, and also obviously special from conservation perspective. So it'd be slow to be able to do anything. Now, the reason I was contemplating putting into my presentation is the most effective heat source for heating for buildings is water to water. So if you can take the heat out of the river water and let it back in again. We're just embarking on the design of a new student accommodation building, and that's something I want to explore, but I don't know. If you ask me that in 6 months' time, how the planners and the environmental section in our local council will receive that idea, time will tell. I think that's probably the most, if you live in a water source, if you live close to a substantial water course, heat pumps is certainly worth considering.
Absolutely. There's a UCC study published this morning, and it reports that a quarter of all the electricity needed by Irish households could be produced by putting solar panels on domestic rooftops. You've probably done a little bit of research into that, considering you're lining up for it. Do you think the same may be possible for farms and farm buildings around the country?
Yeah, I think when all the trade-in tariffs are, all that side of it is ironed out, solar is going to be a cornerstone of what we do in this country, and certainly for farms, absolutely. The roofs that they have to put these solar panels on are ready to go. It's just going to be phenomenal. The only thing I can't think about is the amount of time that we've lost where we haven't done anything. I remember a student coming back from Australia, it must be 8 years ago, and they were doing what we're only thinking about doing now. And all I keep wondering is, why did we not start this 8 years ago? Absolutely.
The emissions reduction and the kind of sentiment in the college, just a question here about how that might carry through to the students' experience, like from recycling to locally sourced food to minimum use of plastics or single-use plastics, fertilizer bags, how you dispose of them, plastic from silage bales and so on.
Yeah, I just came back from an education conference in the south of France a couple of weeks ago, and they're probably a little bit ahead of us. No, they're not probably, they are. So they're now talking about the circular bioeconomy. within their colleges and within their training. And sustainability is part of that circular bioeconomy. I think that their conversations maybe 2 or 3 years ahead of ours. The sustainability is really important to them, obviously, just like it is here, but they're advancing that now into the circular economy. And from their perspective, they were very much about teaching it within the college. So like that question suggests, that like recycling, like any of what we traditionally considered waste, getting that back into the inputs, like that's what we're doing with the slurry, for example. Like the electricity, like the solar electricity, not wasting the solar that falls on the farm. We've lots to do in that, Padraig, to be honest with you. It's like the recycling, we're good at recycling. We get our waste collected in Teagasc from one company, and they have a dashboard that you can log in and benchmark yourself against other colleges, which is quite progressive. So we can see that we're reasonably good at it here in Ballyhaise, but we certainly have a lot to do within our classrooms with regards to recycling. Likewise with the waste, the brown bins, we have a little bit of that here, but we can certainly do more.
Just on that, John, we had a question there from one of our colleagues down on the Dingle Peninsula. Have you any plans for anaerobic digestion or?
No, we don't, not at all. Now, Andy, I again, like Teagasc is doing work on that in Grange.
Yes.
That's slow to get off the ground, no more than what I mentioned about solar panels, but these things are going to be important. My own view on that from where I come from in Donegal is that depending on where they're put, they'll compete with farmers and grass production for food production. And likewise in Northern Ireland, which is only a couple of kilometres away, the same thing, it's using grass for energy production versus food production. I think that's a debate that hasn't come to fruition yet in the south. Because obviously commercially you want to put them where you can grow the most feedstock for them, and the temptation then is to use grown feedstock rather than waste feedstock, and I think that needs probably regulation to make sure that they're strategically placed around the country where they're needed from a waste perspective.
Yeah, it's the old debate of fuel versus food, isn't it?
Yeah,
and energy versus fuel. Yeah.
Like the biomass is very similar as well. Like if we had to rely on imported wood pellets to run our boiler, like getting them domestically is almost impossible when the demand is high. So you're taking in pellets from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean doesn't make sense either.
And is there any way, John, going forward that you might be able to develop your own wood chip from the farm, or is that?
No, it's a question that's often asked. They do that to an extent in Gertchen, but it takes a huge amount of your college land. Even in Gertchen, they still wouldn't have enough land dedicated to give them 100% of their own fuel. They have a very, very substantial land holding, Andy, and could afford to do that. But even with the 500 acres that we have here, it's not something that I want to do. I possibly, but maybe half the farm or more than half the farm. It's quite a large campus building here. We have a lot of people living here in the college, and the heat load is quite significant. We'd have to put in extra boilers too, because what I showed you in that picture, we still have oil for part of the heating here. So no, I don't intend to grow and produce our own wood chip. And
sorry, John, Padraig, as well for interrupting you there, but you mentioned there the water source heat pumps. Do you actually use those on the farm, or is that a...
No, but it's something I'm contemplating now for our new student accommodation building. Okay. But I have a funny feeling we won't be allowed to do it, Andy, but that's why I say I'll let you know in 6 months' time when I see how the idea is received by the planners.
Okay. If you were starting again, John, would you have went with the pellet burners, or like?
Yeah. Come back to that slide.
Oh, for example.
If you look at that slide that I put up with the two kids from Cavan Town, and you see the passion and the anxiety that they have illustrated or shown to me every time, Padraig, every time. If I can do something that will reduce our carbon footprint, then we should do it.
Absolutely, John, but there's different alternatives there, I guess. Like you see piggeries burning straw to create heat. You see like log burners instead of pellet burners. I guess I'm asking, are you happy with the pellet burner option?
Yeah, It's really been, it's a difficult machine to look after, Padraig. I'm a technical background and I have to tend to that machine. Like every principal in the country, you have to look after the heating system. You come to work in the morning. That machine is not for the faint-hearted. It needs to be cleaned out every month. And it often hasn't started when I come to work because it's one thing or the other. Would I put it in if it wasn't working for Teagasc? If it was a private company, without financial incentives, I wouldn't put it in.
Yeah.
Because of the technical hassle of running the machine. The oil boiler never stops. It's so reliable. You just switch it on and off it goes. The alternatives, the heat pumps I've said that. I think the heat pumps are the way to go.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we'll be looking at in the future.
There's the comment there on better spend on good insulation of buildings, and yes, the pumps will do the job, but the insulation, I suppose, and getting the buildings right is key.
Yeah. So our buildings, this house is 300 years old. Now we've replaced the roof, we have insulated it, we put felt on it. You're very limited to what you can retrofit into very old buildings.
You mentioned you have a technical background. This one might test your technical background. Have you ever tried a key line design from PA Yeomans as a way to handle stormwater runoff? Just that question came in just in one of your earlier slides, just showing the roadways and how you'd adapt to them. And he was an Australian civil engineer from a few years ago, and there's a nice link there I can send you afterwards.
Yeah, do.
Does that ring any bells with you?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But what we've done in a number of places around the college is we've put in what you call attenuation, and most people watching this will see that on the side of motorways. These ponds on the side of motorways, so they fill up when you have very heavy rain and slowly release the water back. And we've done that in a good few places around the college. We've put in attenuation, which is storage to stop huge volumes of water going into the water systems when there's very heavy rain. Now, I'm not sure if that's what that refers to. I'd have to read up and see. But we have done a little bit of work with regard to stormwater.
Okay, very good.
Settling ponds, John. That's what you mean, really, isn't it? Settling ponds.
Yeah, they're a little bit more than that, Andy. They do what they do is they might have an 18-inch pipe letting the water into them, but only a 4-inch pipe letting the water out.
Okay.
And they've got capacity then to fill up, and they attenuate. They just release the water slowly. Now there's a certain amount of settlement in them because of that, and stopping some of the sediment releasing into water courses. But they are very important. And I just do not let it go that our climate's changing, as we know. But what we're facing is much heavier rainstorms, probably more drought, but much heavier rain when it does fall. And we really don't have the experience of that in this country to be able to attenuate those huge deluges of rain, and certainly something that we have to factor in when we're building our roadways or building our yards.
And just on that, John, did you ever explore the idea of wetlands that you would see on some, Glenstall had a...
Yeah. We actually have, the farmyard is discharging into a natural wetland.
Okay.
That's like when you talk about that Law Pro and the analysis that they're doing in our water, they're testing it upstream of our farm and downstream of our farm, and then they're downstream further, and our water quality is good before we've ever done all these measures. So obviously that wetland where our farm stormwater was discharging into anyway had an effect. Like, and again, that's not quantified, but that's there already. But we're trying to make it better, Andy. We're trying to improve anything that stormwater that's discharging into that it's completely off clean yards and there's not even any animal traffic on it. So we're just trying to improve. But we do have a natural wetland where the farmyard discharges into already.
Okay.
The clock is ticking, guys. I want to try and get two questions in on your first approach. You mentioned that you use all protected urea now, John. You mentioned that you're trying to get to the stage where you don't need any chemical K. Do you use any chemical P? And do you spread that separate to the obviously is the question. And then just to tie in with that, because the clock is ticking, we've another question. You mentioned the analysis of slurry that you do. How regularly do you do that? And then do you just tie it in with the animal types that are on those stats and the diets that they're on? If the diets change, do you change? Do you test?
So the slurry analysis, we've only started that. This is the first year we've done it. So we've other than having the results, we've no picture. That's why I said that we need to start doing it over 3 or 4 years to build up a picture. I don't intend changing animal diets to try and influence the analysis of the slurry. But I mean, it just gives you an idea of where you're going with that slurry and what you're getting out of it. And as I said, the K in particular. The first question then was to do with sorry, just remind me of that.
Protected urea, you mentioned that's...
Yeah, the phosphorus. Yeah, so we do buy in phosphorus. So we soil test every year, and the whole farm, that's been done for years as part of our research program. We had a pig unit here for many, many years. It only closed recently. So our farm is in good shape with P's and K's. It's typically 3s and lots of 4s as well. But the difficulty we have, which is very typical in Cavan, is the farms that were easily accessible by machinery over the last 30 years. That's where your index 3s and 4s are. And then the fields that weren't accessible from machinery, you have lots of index 2s. We've no index 1. So there is phosphorus needed. And obviously the maintenance as well. But one of the things that wouldn't have come across in the presentation is the research requires uniformity to give good results. So they have to have their phosphorus even across all the fields. So we do have to apply phosphorus to make sure that they can get that in place and objective results.
Andy, I'm going to try to squeeze one more question here with you. John, has the college explored organic farming practices in recent years and/or strategies to reduce antibiotic usage? If so, how have the results been? Thanks for a great presentation.
The organics knows the simple answer to that.
It's good for the last question, really.
No, I know it is. It's very, very interesting because, again, I showed where our students are coming from, and lots of those farms are going to become organic anyway. Like when the new schemes come in, are rolled out, a lot of the farms that are in less productive land, almost by default, will start to become organic. And lots of them are nearly organic anyway because they're meeting a lot of the principles already. I think that's something that's going to be a huge growth in this region for lots of our farmers. Obviously, lots that won't. I think as a college, I haven't got a clear picture of how we fit into that, to be honest. But I do think it's something that we have to explore, because our students will require it, will demand it really, that we give an organic offering on our programs. It's certainly something that some of the farmers that are already involved in organic farming have talked to Teagasc about, that we have specific organic programs for our full-time students. But that's work in progress, I think, is the short answer to that question. With regards to reducing the antibiotics, particularly, say, drying off, we haven't done that. We've only recently put in our cubicle house, and using selective dry cow therapy off a pad and lagoon just was never going to work. So it's something that we've started to look into only in the last 12 months. It's a good question for Donald next week, or when he's on the line.
We'll talk it down very much.
John, thanks very much, Padraig. John, you set it up nicely for next week. You might just remind us again about the open day. I know I mentioned that Donald Patton will be joining us next week. But you might just remind people again of the date of the open day.
Yes. So I think the pictures were my attempt to show you what we're at here, but you can't beat feet in the ground and being able to see the place for yourself. And anybody that hasn't been here in particular, I think it's something you'd really enjoy to come and see the college. So our open day is on the Wednesday the 13th from 10 a.m. And it's a dairy open day, but it's not exclusively for dairying. There's a very large signpost stands at that, and ASSIP stands at it, that are applicable to all sorts of farming. So there's a large part of our open day that will be applied to every sort of farmer. So you're more than welcome to come. Just come to the college house, and we'll organise then for transport to bring us up to where the open day is at the back of our farm. So that's Wednesday the 13th of July at 10 a.m.
Lovely. John, thanks very much for joining us. I'm sure you're up the walls trying to get ready for that open day. Padraig, thank you for giving us the dig out of the questions. And Yvonne in the background, Yvonne Maher, who really runs the whole show. Thanks very much, Yvonne, for your help. John, I really enjoyed that. I hope everybody who tuned in this morning enjoyed it. And if you didn't manage to tune in, then we'll be putting it out on a podcast, and it'll go up on your presentation together with the webinar will go up on our own Teagasc website. So there'll be loads of opportunity for people to look back on it. It was a really great presentation, John. I really enjoyed it. Thank you all very much for joining us, and hopefully you will join us again this time next week for another Signpost series. So thanks very much.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.